Welcome, welcome. It's a Thursday, and that means only one thing over here on MongoDB TV land, and it's welcome to MongoDB TV Cloud Connect. I'm Shane McAllister. I'm a lead developer advocate here on the developer relations team at MongoDB, and we're delighted to have you join us once again. We are streaming live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and so if you're joining us from either of those platforms, you're very welcome. Firstly, while we're waiting to get underway, do let us know who you are and where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you. And once we do get underway, should you have any questions for us, please drop them into the chat and we'll try to answer them either live while we're going through our demo and our content, or else at the tail end of the show as well too, when we'll have some more time. We live stream the Cloud Connect show every Thursday. I was on holidays, PTO, over the last couple of weeks, so I do need to shout out and thank my colleagues Mira and Jesse for the stellar effort they did in the shows in my absence. I do very much appreciate it. For those of you joining us live, also know that this is being recorded and it will be available on MongoDB's YouTube channel once it's finished. So if you can't stay for all of our stream today, don't worry about that. The recording will be there for you to jump back into and also to share with your colleagues if you find it useful. And if you are watching this as a recording, and we do welcome you. And although we can't live chat with you, as I say, do leave some comments. We really appreciate that. We'll take a look at those and try to respond to those as well too. And as ever, do not forget to like and subscribe to the MongoDB YouTube channel if you haven't already. It really helps us grow our audience. Anyway, this is the Cloud Connect show, and we turn our attention this time to showing how easy it is to create a C# AWS Lambda microservice that interacts with MongoDB. We've got a great walkthrough demo to show you, but before I get any further at all, let me bring on my guest, my colleague, Hubert Nguyen. Hubert, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on board.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Shane, for inviting me to the show.
Excellent. So, Hubert, I know previously you've been co-founder and a CTO of Uber Gizmo, also a manager of developer education at NVIDIA, and you very famously worked in Cryo Interactive, the company behind the first Doom video game.
Yeah, that's right. It's been a very diverse tech background since I've been moving here in Silicon Valley. So I'm based in San Francisco, and I moved from France, as you might imagine. And I currently work at MongoDB as a developer advocate, and my job is to make developers more productive. Recently, I've been working on things like search. I also have some PHP projects, and sometimes I do C++ and C# projects as well, skills that I got from the video games days.
Excellent, excellent. And listen, I'm really delighted to have you on board. For our audience, I reached out to Hubert only about 2 weeks ago and said, any chance you could come on the show? And based on a previous article that Hubert has up on our developer center, and he jumped at the chance to join us. He's a seasoned developer advocate. He's well used to this type of role and presenting it. But at the end of the day, we're still very grateful for the time and effort that you're going to give us. So for those of us, obviously people very familiar, hopefully, with MongoDB, this is the Cloud Connect show where we generally showcase what we do with our partners, AWS, Azure, Google, and indeed some of our other tech partners. So today it's all about Lambda, C# and MongoDB. So in a nutshell, what should people expect as we go through the next 50 or so minutes of this demo? What are we going to build today?
Yeah, so today we're going to build a microservice in C# that's deployed as a function in AWS Lambda. And that function will interact with MongoDB, so connect and then read data. So once you get to that stage, you can move on to the next thing, which is learning how to perform queries and write data in MongoDB, but that's for another show. Today, we want to focus on how to connect with Lambda and create our first function.
Okay, so you had an article up on our developer center. So there's a short link there for anybody who wants to follow along in the article as well too, or save it for later to recap. mdb.link/lambda is the shortcode that will get you there. In essence, our developer center is where you'll find all of the output of the content from our whole DevRel team and others. And depending what stack you're interested in or what partner technologies you're interested in, you can go into the developer center and filter by AWS, filter by C#, etc. as well too. And that will present all of the articles that are in that collection, in that space. So really, really powerful. Hubert and others continuously create content up there, and it's a really, really a good resource. So that article there, if you follow that link, will get to you the guts of what we're going through today. But without further ado, I suppose, Hubert, we're going to talk a little bit about Lambda, what Lambda is in the first place, for those who may not be familiar.
Yeah, so if you haven't used Lambda yet, it's a serverless compute platform in which you can essentially upload a small app that's defined by a single class. And you can have more libraries and all that in there as well, but your app is one class, and within that class, one method or one function is defined as the entry point for an API endpoint. Right? So you create an app, it creates an API endpoint online, and you manage that single function. It's very simple, very self-contained, and people have different strategies on using these types of services. So, for example, I could think of something like if I wanted to ingest data from IoT devices, I might use something like this, because all my fleet of IoT device would send the same type of request to a single endpoint. And maybe some of the time they don't send anything. Maybe when they sense something happening, they all send data at once. So it's very convenient to have something like AWS Lambda that's one, you only pay for what you use. Two, you don't have to manage hardware, right? So no provisioning, no debugging and rebooting servers.
Which is always super helpful not to have to do that, right?
Exactly. I mean, sometimes you just save a lot of money by not managing DevOps. And so as a startup founder, I always looked for serverless or like managed services.
So ultimately, I suppose, as you said, it's great for low traffic and spiky use cases, but more particularly, you're not worried about provisioning or managing the servers and doing any of that. And I think, that along with what we do here in MongoDB is ultimately about making developers more productive, taking everything away, abstracting away everything that kind of just interrupts them building the best application or the best service or the best product for their users. And, we have and no more than AWS, the scale and the experience and the background to take care of these, I suppose, more mundane sides of your application development process. And, with that comes the scale and I suppose the global reach as well too. So I think, we have, again, the developer center. If you go there searching for Lambda, you'll find quite a few articles up there in various use cases. But let's get started, I suppose, into the meat of what we're trying to do today. Obviously, we want to get up and running, so we're going to need Atlas as well too, and an account on MongoDB Atlas, right?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So let's go to Atlas, and so if you go to the home page, it would look something like that. So you would have different projects. So I have a number of them. So typically, if you go now and go to mongodb.com/cloud, you will land onto a page. Let me show you like this. Cloud, that's the URL you want, and you can click on that try free button to go to a page where you can register for a new account and start a free cluster. So typically you would land into a page like this, and then you'll create a new project. So I have one for the demo, but I'll show you how it looks.
Excellent. And I suppose to fill in the gaps, if you're not familiar with Atlas, obviously it's our database as a service, but it's so much more than that. We probably, if you want to look at past live streams or even the other videos we have up on YouTube, you will see, you know, us diving into the various areas of Atlas. And the free tier that Hubert speaks about is always free. We have this M0 free tier, that is great for testing things out, getting your minimal viable product up and running, etc. as well too. If you want to move to our paid tiers, that's perfectly fine. You can scale and grow. And indeed, we have Atlas serverless for, again, those kind of spiky, sporadic workloads, perhaps as well too. So huge amount of options. And as always, we can deploy Atlas across the 3 cloud providers, AWS, GCP or Google Cloud, sorry, and Azure. So you have the choice there. So just filling in the background there, Hubert, sorry to interrupt, but you're going to make this from start to finish, right?
And some people have questions about what's the difference between the MongoDB community, which is the local version that you can host, and Atlas. And Atlas is not just a managed database, it's a whole developer data platform that goes from providing you with API endpoints, and such as a GraphQL API endpoints, all the way to storing your data into a cold storage like S3, while making it still queryable at the same time. So that's a big difference that I encourage people to look into. And let's create a new project. So I'll show you what it looks like. I'll create my new project. I switched to a silent keyboard for the for the stream, and I don't.
Very good.
Okay, so basically this is an Atlas project. So Atlas is the infrastructure side of MongoDB, and then later on we'll create a database, which is the data side of it. So for now, I'll be the only member of that project, and I click on create. And very quickly, we'll have our project. And if you want to create a new database, we'll call that a deployment, because the smallest deployment you can have is a 3-node cluster. So it's highly resilient, highly available, and it's free. So you should definitely take advantage of it. So we're going to create our M0, which is free forever, with half a gig of storage. A lot of startups actually use M0s as a production cluster. And so I'll leave everything. So as Shane was saying, you can pick your provider of choice. I've tried all of them, and they all work essentially in a similar way. And I'll keep the name.
And you can see the region drop down there too. Obviously, I don't remember the last count, but we're in 130 plus regions. So obviously you pick whatever's nearest to you, and so that makes sense.
Okay, and then now we can create our cluster. So 3 nodes. Oh yeah, we need to prove you have 3 nodes.
We always get this in the live streams, and it's a nice little test of your ability to not be a robot, Hubert.
Yes. Oh,
there you failed. You failed.
No. Okay, I'm not sure what happened. Let's try again. Maybe I got logged off.
Oh,
yeah.
See, folks, this is live. This is not pre-recorded. It's properly live. Things like this happen. So yeah, you got logged out of MongoDB. No doubt you're probably going to get logged out of AWS perhaps halfway through this session too. We'll see.
Okay, I'm going to use my 2FA to get back in. I'm being asked for my fingerprints twice. Okay, looks like we're going to be back in business. And change my window. Okay. All right, so we can get back to creating our deployment. So MongoDB is very secure. If you forget to log out, it will log you out. Okay, 1 second. All right, I'm human enough. Very good. So the next step is to create a password. So by default, it's going to use your current username, and it will create a password. I'm not going to use that one. So let me delete that. I'll create a password. Well, I guess I should that out of the window just for a bit. And then I'll click on create user, and I'm coming back. Okay. So our user has been created, and now we are going to set up the firewall. So normally at this point, if you're an AWS user, you should like say cloud environment, but we're not going to do that right now because the VPC peering, so the super secure link between AWS and MongoDB Atlas is not available on the free N0 tier. So we are going to pretend like we're using a local environment, and we'll set up the firewall so that Lambda can still connect. And we are doing that by using the IP address 0.0.0.0, which is basically that any IP can connect. And we'll add this entry. And now you have my IP address too. And then we'll click on finish and close. Okay. All right, so the next thing we're going to do here is normally you could import data, and I highly recommend taking a look at the data modeling templates because data modeling is very important when you work with databases in general. But we'll load the sample data. MongoDB has a set of several large sample data. I think the whole thing is 400 megabytes. These are very interesting data sets in which you can perform complex queries, and I highly recommend people to look into that. So I clicked on load sample data, and it's going to take
Not a lot of our tutorials make use of those sample data sets, and I think it's for those who want to follow on and do something after this live stream, having those sample data sets already loaded really helps.
Yeah, absolutely. When we work on demos, the one of the hardest parts is to find interesting data to share with. And I'm very grateful we have these.
Yeah, they're very good to leverage. I know that we've been trying to find some new interesting data sets to show off our vector search that we announced back in June and other things as well too. And it is tough. It's tough to find, as you said, interesting data sets to run demos against.
But I think once you have an app in production, your data is the most interesting one you'll deal with.
True, very true.
Cool. So while it's deploying the data, I think so that's about it for the infrastructure and database side. So we created our cluster, we have loaded our data, and while it's loading, I think we can go to the next step and start using Visual Studio.
Perfect. And for those who use Visual Studio regularly, you may be aware that we have a MongoDB plugin for VS Code. If you're not, do check that out as well too. It's worth it. The prior streams that I mentioned, the one actually that was done in my absence while I was on holidays, was on the VS Code plugin as well too. So go back and check that stream out with Jesse.
Yeah, very nice, nicely plugged. So we'll create a new project. And so before doing that, in the article, I've linked to the AWS page that contains, so normally you need to download the AWS templates for Visual Studio. So I've done that prior to the show, but You need to download those, and they are like ready-made projects for different languages. So in our case, we're interested by the AWS Lambda template. And so there's several of them. Some use CloudFormation, and that's not really the topic of today. Some come with tests, so a little bit more code than we want. So we'll use that one at the bottom, which is the basic one for C#. So I'll select that and click next.
And I put a link there at the bottom, which is the URL. It's really, really long. I would imagine that you can just search for creating a Lambda, creating a project in Visual Studio. That should get you there. It is there. It does exist. So that's the point that Hubert was mentioning. I just needed to type faster to get the banner up.
Yeah, that's a really good tutorial. And it has more details than what we're going to talk about today. But let's proceed, and I'll use a new directory live. You can tell I've been testing things yesterday.
You came prepared.
Yeah. And okay, so that looks good. We'll create, and then we'll choose empty function, which is the one that has the less boilerplate code.
Okay.
And finish. And it's going to configure the project for us.
So just, I suppose, before we get too deep into it, what's the end result here, Hubert? What is the project you're going to show us today?
Secondary screen. So the interesting. Go ahead.
Sorry, I think I might have glitched on you there a second. I was just saying, before we get too deep into the, how to build, what is it actually? What's the end result? What are we going to have built by the end of our session today?
Okay, yeah. So what we're going to end up with is a live AWS Lambda function that connects to MongoDB and fetches the first record of the Airbnb sample database. And I'm going to show you what that data looks like, actually. So now our data should be live. And so I'll go into Atlas, and I clicked on database. And in our cluster here, you can browse the collections. And that's the database we're interested in. And we are going to look in that. So a collection in SQL parlance would be like a table. And here we are looking at the first record. And a record would be like a row for SQL users. The main difference is in MongoDB, when you have a document, the document can contain arrays of objects, and very complex, potentially complex nested structures. And that's one of the main strengths of MongoDB, because having those type of structures can lead to using less join-like queries. And joins are very computationally expensive. So that makes the querying data more efficient. And if people are not aware of why MongoDB is so popular, and that's because it is much more computationally efficient, because you can reduce the number of joins depending on your queries. So the way you design data starts with how you use it. And we always have a say, data that is queried together should be stored together. And that's kind of like the fundamental idea that makes MongoDB so efficient for all kinds of usage. Okay, so we want to connect and retrieve the first record. So that's what we're going to end up with, a live AWS Lambda function that connects to MongoDB and gets some data out of it.
And all of these sample data collections that we have here were what was loaded into your cluster at the beginning. We're going to work with this Airbnb one, but we have Mflix, which is a movie database, restaurant reviews database as well too. So as you said earlier, Hubert, they're really interesting databases to work with, and lots of our tutorials, etc., concentrate on using these ones. So it's really easy to get up and running quickly.
Yeah, and to your point, for these two in particular, Sample Netflix and Sample Restaurants, we have great demos and code base already available. People can search on our DevHub website and find apps, demo apps that use this type of databases.
Yeah, so that's, if you just go to developer.mongodb.com, that's where you'll find our dev center, which has the output of, as I said earlier, most of the DevRel team, and indeed others as well across the whole organization, from our product and engineering team too.
Yeah, so going back to Visual Studio, so the function.cs file here is where the code is, and you can see, so that public class function, that's your app. Basically, it's the class that defines your app, and this function handler here is the implementation of your Lambda endpoint, right? So when someone hits the API endpoint, this gets executed. So we're going to make some changes and make it connect to MongoDB and output some MongoDB data. So the first thing we need to do is to add a MongoDB C# driver. And you do that by going to the solution, and we are going to add a package. So let's click on the package manager. So that's what we have installed. We're going to search for the official MongoDB driver.
I like the use of the word official.
Sometimes you find all kinds of packages.
Yeah, you do. And so, yeah, no, it's important to search correctly. And this is the driver package for Visual Studio.
Yeah. I can't seem to find it. Hang on. Let's just.
You've a typo. Just yeah, that was it.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So that's the one you want. So MongoDB the driver includes these two. So that's the one we want. I'm not 100% sure why. So let's say, for example, if you wanted a tool that manipulates BSON files only or BSON documents only, but don't need to connect, then you could use just that one. But the driver will include the two others.
And just BSON is binary JSON. It's what underpins MongoDB. It allows us to have a few more data types than JSON supports, etc. as well too. But everyday practice, you don't need to know that piece of information. That helps.
Yeah, sometimes, if you work on some specific AI projects, for example, you might want to define your floating point numbers in a very specific format that's more than the usual float 32. So that gives you the flexibility that you wouldn't have with JSON. And BSON is also backed by a very powerful storage engine that we use in MongoDB. And so when you save it on disk, it's super efficient. Okay, so we want to add that into our project, and we'll just click on, so we checked these two, and we'll click on install.
Okay.
And you can see at the bottom here, there's an update. We need to accept the license. I do. And it's installed now. And so once the driver is installed, you can get back into the code and start adding MongoDB specific things. So the first thing we should do is to include our code, our libraries, our driver that we just added. So we're going to use these two lines. And now we can start creating a MongoDB client into our class. So we'll add a member like this.
Okay.
And so there are two interesting things here. So this question mark is to say that client can be a null value in addition of being a Mongo client type. And that's because when you initialize the database, there's a chance that if you lose connectivity, it might return a null value to tell you, hey, the client is not working. So we need to add some kind of checks later on. And the other interesting thing here is that we're going to declare this as a static member. And that's actually very important because when you do serverless services like this, every time someone hits the endpoint, we're going to create an instance of that class. And at the same time, we don't want to create a new client, especially if they all run on the same host machine. So by declaring it as a static, so what we're trying to do is to share the Mongo client across all the instances of the function class. So that's documented in an article.
I'll grab the link for that one. Yes, yeah, and I'll throw it in the banners as well too.
So hang on, that's not the one I was thinking of. I know we have an article on MongoDB about interacting or managing the number of connections.
We do. So it's that big long one again. So by all means, just search for manage connections, AWS Lambda, and you'll get in there. But that's up in our docs site. And most of our docs site, fair and play to the docs team, is superb. And most of the information you need is going to be in there.
Yeah, it's this one. Manage connections with AWS Lambda. So that's what you want to read if you want to know all the details.
And the key thing with that static piece, Hubert, is because it's technically possible each function can run on a different host, with serverless in particular, right?
Yes, so in theory, it's possible. And I mean, there's not much you can do about it because you don't have control over the physical implementation. Usually, though, your service tends to run on the same VPC, at least, when you don't have a lot of traffic yet. So doing something like that keeps the number of connections as low as possible. And even though it's not guaranteed that it's going to behave the way we want, that's the best we can do from the code point of view. So that's a good practice.
Yeah, best practices, but we don't have complete control, as you say, but hopefully it should be, everything should be okay.
And in MongoDB Atlas, you can keep an eye on the number of connections that are being generated, because we have a lot of metrics and monitoring features going on there. So the next thing we're going to do is, now that we have declared our client, we need to have a function that creates it. So I'm going to add this very simple function that's basically going to define the connection string that we're going to get from the environment variable. So that's one of the ways you can get your connection and user and password in AWS Lambda. If you are going in production, you might want to look at the AWS secrets, which is probably a better way, in my opinion, to store your username and passwords. And it makes it shareable, so it could be very convenient. So we'll get that connection string, username, password, and then we are going to instantiate a MongoDB client. And who's calling that function? Well, we're going to add a static constructor. Right. So every time we instantiate this class, it's going to try to create a new client. But because it's a static function, it will do it only once. So the way in C# the way it works is if you declare a static constructor, it's going to execute only when it initializes the static members of the class. So if I create like 3 instances of this class, the function class, it will call this function only once. And once this member has been initialized, it's not going to call that static function.
Okay, understood. Yeah.
And so now we can add our connection string. So what I'm going to do here is, so first we're going to run that locally. And I'm going to set up the local environment variable. So I'm going to debug and the debug properties here. And if you scroll down, there's the environment variable. So I said that I wanted to have MongoDB _URI. And then I'll paste the whole connection string. So actually, maybe we should tell people how to get the connection string. What do you think?
Sure, yeah. Jump back into Atlas there. So yeah. I suppose the problem with us in DevRel in particular is we're so used to this, sometimes we forget that the intermediate step. So we need to show where the connection string is held.
Okay, so I'm going to go back into Atlas.
Which one?
And I haven't been logged out yet.
Good.
Okay, so if we go back to the databases, all right, so that's your cluster here, and then there's a big connect button. And so you have slightly different ways of connecting or slightly different syntaxes. The one that we're interested in right now is via the driver. So you can click on that, and you can choose.
I'm just bringing up the comment from Cloud Surfer there, talk about the connections are managed. So we have a lot of different ways that you can connect from other services back to MongoDB. So hopefully we'll address this now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if we choose CNET, C#.
Click the drop down there just so people can see the other drivers that we have as well too. We've got, I think, is it 13, 14 drivers for a language of your choice anyway. There are ones, and there's obviously some open source ones out there as well too for other languages.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll choose this one. So we'll just make a copy. And so don't forget to update the password field here with your actual password.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you have that, you can go back to Visual Studio. And so go back to the environment variable that we're setting up. And I'm going to paste the whole thing here. And then I'll use my temporary password.
Yeah, we don't want your passwords out there, Hubert. You're going to get rid of it anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Let me, well, yes, that's a temporary password, so all good. Okay. And then, so once you've done that, you can close the window.
Mm-hmm.
And now we should be good. So I'm checking. All right, so let's try building this. And it seems to work. And then we'll execute it locally. Oh, it's not done building it. Okay, so success.
Mm-hmm.
Let's run it on the local machine.
Hubert, you have a pop-up from StreamYard just there. You could hit hide. I think it's just covering a bit of the console or debug output too. Do you see it?
That's one?
Yeah.
See that? Yes. Okay, thank you.
There you go. No worries.
All right. So so Visual Studio created that little like local server and window. And so what we're going to do is, so the function input, what's expected in the sample that we use is just like a simple string. So I'll say like hello. So some input is expected, and depending on your function, it could be different inputs. And we'll execute this. Oh yeah, okay. So right now what's happening is the default code takes the input hello and then turns it into like an all cap. And that's, so basically the app is working as expected. We're not doing anything MongoDB yet, but you've seen we've entered an input and then it returned the output with an uppercase transformation. So let's add some MongoDB code. And what we're going to do basically is we're going to add some code that connects to the database, selects a collection, and queries the first document of the collection. So very simple, it's very readable. So let me...
And just before we dive in, Hubert, if I could interrupt, the follow-up question from Cloud Surfer was connection management from, or pooling from Lambda. Can you add any color to that? and how that
So
works?
connection management in terms of trying to share as many connections as possible, you think?
I don't know. Maybe Cloud Surfer can add into the comments exactly the details that he or she is looking for, and that would be great. And we can pick that up at the tail end. Sorry, I thought it would be good to throw this up there, but just before you jumped.
Oh yeah, yes. Okay. So about the pooling, yeah. So that's kind of what we discussed earlier. So conceptually, what we try to do with the static Mongo client declaration was to try to share, like at the software level, the connection between as many instances of the function as possible. In theory, the driver can try to be smart as well and try to manage the pooling, and I bet that's what it's doing. If you want, you can go into the driver GitHub and search into the issues. I'm pretty sure that was discussed. But usually the drivers try to use hash tables and things like that to minimize the number of connection as well.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah,
there you go.
I mean,
yeah.
If you scale big enough, you might have to upgrade your instance. But that's the eventually, if you run out of connection, that's kind of like the way to deal with it. I'm pretty sure the driver team does everything they can to manage the pooling, and then we're trying in that particular app to do what we can.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's change the function a little bit. So I've commented this out.
We're going to change it so that we can read the data from MongoDB, right?
Yeah. And then, so we're adding a very simple, it's pretty readable. So you can see here, we're selecting a database, that Airbnb database. Within the database, we want to have access to that particular collection. And we're going to do a find, which is like a select where, if you're a SQL person, with an empty query. And we just want to have the first document.
Just return the first. Okay.
Yeah.
Understood.
And then from that document, we'll turn the BSON document into a string, and then we'll return it. So we can try that. I'll stop the previous instance, and then I'll rebuild. I could have pressed run, I guess, and then we'll try it locally. Again, it's going to open a window. And it's always creating a window outside of my screen. It's funny.
That's okay. You got this. You can find it at least.
Yeah, and then let's not forget the expected input. We're not using it, but we still need to have it there. And we're executing the function. Oh, then something did not work.
Yeah, proper live stuff once again. Okay, where do we have to jump back to try and figure out what's wrong?
Let's see. No, so it's not that. So we don't have a lot of. Oh wait. So it says, okay, so that's why we have like a error handling. So it says handling failed, and so it means we landed here, which means it couldn't.
The bottom left, was there a authentication exception thrown in the debug window?
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. So we tried to
save that.
So let me check. Let me check my Atlas credentials, because that's might be.
Sure. Yeah, that looks like the problem.
Usually it's something like that. So I'm going to the demo. So I'm using that particular database. And we'll look at the database access. Oh, first let's look at the network access. Okay, so. And so that's a cool thing here in Atlas. You can set up this IP that will be auto-deleted in a few days. Okay, database access. So that's me. Let me check if my password is Okay. That looks fine. Oh,
Looks
maybe. Hang on, I need to paste it into. Maybe there's like a character that's not the way it should be up. I'll try putting it into my notepad.
Yeah, just to remove anything strange characters.
Yeah, you never know. That looks fine. So let me switch back to the other projects that I have, which is the exact same, but the the password
Excellent.
is
In the tradition of all the good cookery programs, here's one we baked earlier, but we're just going to run this and see, right? So we can carry on.
yeah. So it uses the same connection, so we'll
Perfect.
quickly know if it's a password issue or something like that. Okay, so that's our expected inputs. Execute. Oh yeah, there you go.
There you
So
go.
yeah,
That's the
so
first
I
one,
think
first record, right?
one of the settings, yeah. So that's the first one, and that's exactly what we asked the function to do. And I think one of my settings in Visual Studio was off. But basically, it does the job locally. And I think now what we want to do is to upload it into AWS to make the function live.
Perfect. Perfect.
Right, so
We've got to publish this to Lambda, right?
Exactly, yes. And so to do that, you go to the solution, or to the project, I'm sorry. And then you do publish to AWS Lambda.
Okay.
So you'll be presented with this window, and I'll explain like what information you need. So the function name here is how it's going to be called in the AWS dashboard.
Okay.
Right? So the word function is used quite a bit in everywhere. So it could be confusing at first, but this is how you will see it in the AWS dashboard. And so the description, you can enter anything you want. And you choose your data center and all that. So that's your AWS credentials. So this is going to use a command line behind the scenes. So you need to install the AWS CLI interface and have it work with your credentials and all that first. And I'll show you how to check if it works. So for example, after installing the CLI SDK, you can do something like, well, first of all, you do AWS version, right? So you see it's installed. And if you want to check your credentials, the easiest way that I know of is to do an AWS S3 LS. So that's listing your bucket, and you need the credentials to work. Okay, so that's all the buckets I can access. I know the CLI is working, so I can proceed with this. And so the handler here is basically a reference to that function. So conceptually, you could have different, you could have more methods in your class, and you have to pick one of them. So right now, we don't have much of a choice. We'll stick with that one. And then there's a second screen here. And basically, you would have like your so that's the variable that you have to declare. So it's going to recreate this environment into the live AWS function. All right. So now you just upload, and it's doing all these things in the background. So packaging the app and all that. And then at the end of it, it's going to open like a little interface that will allow you to test the live function instead of running it locally.
Okay.
There you go. So that's your UI, and it's very similar in functionality to the one we looked at before. So you still need to have your input.
Input in there. Okay.
Yeah, and then instead of execute, now you click on invoke, and then it's going to call the function, and there you go. So that's your record that we're looking for. So something that's interesting here is the duration. So you can see like 4,000 milliseconds is actually quite long. And you might wonder, hey, what's going on? So what happened here is the first time you invoked a live function, it's going to create like the container or whatever environment your function is running into. And then it will create the connection that takes like maybe 100 milliseconds. But the second time you call it, it's going to be much shorter. So 114, if you call it more, 23 milliseconds.
So that's more than 100 times quicker, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the first execution, we call that a cold start, right? Because you need to initialize the hardware, the connection, and all that. And then the subsequent API calls are going to be benefiting from a warm start. So it's going to be much faster.
Which is important, obviously, when, billing cycles, et cetera, you need fast, speedy query. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then, if you choose your data center next to your production server, then that's going to reduce the latency further. Ideally, you want to be in the same data center if you can. But I've run loads in productions where the database was outside of in a nearby data center, but not in the same one. And it's okay if your throughput is not too high, but keep an eye on that as well. And so there you go. Basically, that's how you build an AWS Lambda function that's connected to MongoDB. We've uploaded it live, and now you could hit the API endpoint if you wanted to.
Excellent.
Yeah. I wanted to point something out to the audience. Once you know how to connect to MongoDB and manipulate data, if you want to have more examples of how to do certain things, I highly recommend you to go to GitHub. Go to the Mongo C# driver. So that's the official GitHub repo. They have a test directory, for regression testing and all that. And you can find all kinds of queries in there that are done the right way, that will show you the proper syntax. Honestly, when I was on before I joined MongoDB, and I was a MongoDB customer, I wish I knew about this because I went on the web and found all kinds of answers that were not always the right one. And later on, when I joined MongoDB, I learned about these tests, and they are a great place for any language. So this is the C# one, but I'm also using the PHP tests as an inspiration sometimes, just to see how things are done. It's super interesting.
Perfect. Well, look, I think that was, I suppose the simplicity sometimes gets overlooked. I mean, this was a number of steps. We started off with a raw Atlas account, a database anyway. You had the account, you created the cluster there as well too. Then you went across into AWS and you got Lambda into Visual Studio, created all of that, and then you connected the two together, which was ideal. You ran it locally first, and you're connecting the two together. So it was really interesting to see that flow, and then nice swap in the middle there to the one that was behaving. Authentication is always the downfall when we're doing live demos, I think, with people. So you recovered from that one really well, and then ultimately published it to Lambda and got it running there as well too. So I think it's, we only have a certain amount of time to do these live streams, and I think that whilst it looks that we went through things quite quickly, the key steps are nicely documented in your original article, Hubert, and the repos there for people to go into and play around and do something self. Now, this is our sample database, but any connection back to MongoDB, to any database that you have, using Lambda to deploy your application and get rid of all of that management is ideal. And as we said at the very beginning, there is a lot of tutorials and demos that we have on the MongoDB site for that as well too. I was keeping an eye on most of the questions on the way through. I think the most obviously superb to see so many people join us both on YouTube and LinkedIn from lots of different places. We do appreciate that. It's not always the perfect time zone for this live stream. Some of the questions were, is it recording, because people were joining late? It is, for those of you who want to rewatch or miss the beginning maybe of the introductions with myself and Hubert. It'll be on the MongoDB YouTube channel. We have a live section there. And if you go into there, you can see this and all the previous live streams that we do. Cloud Connect is not the only show that we're doing now. We have plenty more coming from the rest of our colleagues here at MongoDB as well too. I think we got a couple of others. There was one or two that were very, very specific. And I would say to those posters of those questions that, probably we need to know a bit more in order to comment on your particular situation, but probably need to know much more than we could do on a live stream such as this. So our forums are staffed by both our community team and our engineers as well too. So if you want to join the community and jump in there to pose any questions you have, it's really vibrant in there, and that's where we can, help you out a little bit more. And get through some, more detailed technical questions for your own particular scenario. So apologies I didn't bring those on screen. They were too specific that neither Hubert nor myself would be able to help you out in this forum. Just before we end up a little bit more, some more links, go to the Developer Center that we mentioned throughout, where Hubert's original article was. Easy to get there, developer.mongodb.com. Hubert is going to jump and show you now. This is live. You can go, so you can get in there from, also if you go to resources in the drop-down menu, you'll find the Developer Centers based in there as well too. So down and across. So we're constantly publishing here. You can search throughout. You can choose your language of choice. You can choose your platform of choice as well too, or your technology of choice, and find all the associated articles there too. So that's well worth checking out. As I said, we do have lots of other MongoDB TV shows. Shortcut for that, mongodb.tv, to find out what's coming up there as well too. And we're streaming very regularly. Trying to see if there's any other. Thank you for your kind comments and how you enjoyed the show as well too. If we didn't get to your comments during this episode, we do apologize. As I said, jump over to our forums and raise those there. Any last parting thoughts or comments for our viewers here, Hubert, from yourself?
So I think if I had one message for maybe new MongoDB users, I would say there's a perception that MongoDB is schemaless, and that's not actually quite true. MongoDB is schema optional, which means you can choose to enforce a schema or not. You can even choose to enforce a partial schema only. And the schema design is very important. You should look at schema design. We call that data modeling. Go to our website and search for data modeling. And if anything, watch at least a video about it on our YouTube channel, because once you know how to use data modeling to your advantage, that's when you'll get the most out of MongoDB, and you can scale with almost no limits. So that's my parting message.
Excellent, and thank you for that. So those that do want to get started, as Hubert mentioned at the beginning, M0 tier, generous storage, and enough for your MVPs and more, to be honest, your proof of concepts as well too. Outside of that, we have other tiers and also Atlas serverless now. So easy to get up and running on that. Hubert, it's been my pleasure to host and have you on board as a guest. I think at the very beginning, you mentioned that that would be some content for another show. So I'm going to hold you to that. We'll get you back in a number of weeks' time to follow up on what we've done here. But I think as a teaser, but more of a teaser as to how easy and straightforward it was to connect services and get your functions up and running, talking back to MongoDB, getting it up onto Lambda. I think this was a super clear example. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been great to have you.
Thanks for the invite, and see you soon.
No worries. And to all our viewers on LinkedIn and YouTube, we are regularly here most Thursdays anyway. Sometimes it's the scheduling conflict and it doesn't happen, but do join us again. Keep an eye on the YouTube live section of our MongoDB channel to see what's upcoming. And thank you so much for all your comments and interactions. We do appreciate it, and we look forward to having you again. So from Hubert and myself, thank you so much for joining us. Take care and see you soon.